Hey guys, tonight we're going to pull back the heavy, drafty tapestries of history and peek into a very specific, often romanticized, corner of the medieval world, sleeping in a castle, especially during the soul-crushing grip of winter. Forget the gilded fantasies of Hollywood, the roaring fires in every room, and the soft, downy beds. Tonight, we're diving into the icy, often uncomfortable reality. So, dim the lights, perhaps turn on a fan for that soft, omnipresent draft that would have snaked through every stone crack, and let's ease into tonight's chilling journey together. When you picture a medieval castle, what comes to mind? Towering stone walls, formidable battlements, banners fluttering in the breeze, brave knights, and perhaps a cozy interior with a massive fireplace, casting a warm, inviting glow over noble lords and ladies. Hollywood has done a remarkable job of selling us this particular fantasy. A fortress of strength that somehow magically translated into a bastion of warmth. Tonight, dear traveller, we're here to shatter that illusion, to introduce you to the far less glamorous, bone-chilling reality of spending a winter's night within those very same impressive stone walls. Because when it came to medieval castles, what made them impregnable fortresses against enemies also made them absolute bastions of misery against the cold. Let's start with the fundamental misconception, the idea of comfort as we understand it today. In the medieval world, comfort was a luxury, often unattainable, and rarely prioritized in architecture designed for defense. A castle was, first and foremost, a military installation, a statement of power, and a sanctuary from outside threats. Its primary purpose was to keep others out and to withstand siege. Keeping its inhabitants warm and snug during a brutal January gale was, frankly, a distant secondary consideration, often achieved through sheer volume of bodies, textiles, and brute force of firewood, rather than intelligent design. Imagine stepping into the great hall of a lord's castle on a winter's evening. The images in your mind likely feature a fire, perhaps two, blazing in colossal stone hearths, flames leaping merrily towards sooty chimneys. They were the very heart of the castle's attempt at warmth. But here's the rub. Medieval castles were built predominantly of stone. Thick, unyielding, magnificent stone. Stone is an incredible material for resisting a battering ram, for deflecting arrows, for standing firm for centuries. It is also an absolutely spectacular conductor of cold. Once those massive walls, which could be 10 to 15 feet thick, absorbed the winter chill, they became enormous, perpetually cold sponges. They radiated frigid air inwards, creating a constant, pervasive damp cold that no single fireplace, however grand, could ever truly conquer. The fire might make the immediate vicinity of the hearth tolerable, perhaps even warm your face and chest, but turn your back and the icy breath of the stone walls would remind you precisely where you were. It was a constant, losing battle against the very fabric of your home. The architectural features, so vital for defense, were catastrophic for retaining heat. Arrow slits, those narrow vertical openings in the walls, were perfect for archers to shoot through, but they were also perfect conduits for icy winds to whistle into every chamber. Battlements and crenellations, designed to offer cover to defenders on the roof, ensured that the wind had free rein to scour the entire top of the castle, driving cold air downwards into every opening. Even the windows, if they existed beyond mere slits, were often unglazed or covered only by wooden shutters, oiled cloth or horn. Materials that did little to stop the wind and less to retain any precious heat. Imagine trying to sleep in a room with a permanent icy breeze snaking through every crack, rattling flimsy coverings and chilling you to the bone. Ventilation, a modern concern for health, was in medieval castles a consequence of necessity, the need to vent smoke, and a byproduct of construction. Chimneys, though they existed, were often inefficient by modern standards, and the sheer volume of smoke from open fires, braziers, and the communal Great Hall meant that the air quality could be abysmal, But even with chimneys, the constant drafts needed to keep those fires burning effectively. Pulling smoke upwards also pulled vast quantities of cold outside air into the castle. It was a thermal paradox. You needed airflow for the fire, but that airflow was your sworn enemy in the battle against the cold. The very scale of a castle worked against comfort. Heat rises, and in a great hall with a ceiling perhaps 30 or 40 feet high, any warmth generated by a floor level fire would quickly dissipate upwards, creating a stratified temperature gradient where your feet remain perpetually numb, while the upper reaches of the room might be vaguely less frigid. This meant that the true comfort zone around a fire was surprisingly small and highly contested. So, when you think of sleeping in a medieval castle during winter, banish the image of cozy snuggling under a plush duvet. Replace it with the reality of layered woolens, chattering teeth, condensation forming on cold stone, and the constant damp chill that permeated everything. It was a test of endurance, a daily negotiation with the elements, and a grim reminder that even the most powerful lords and ladies of the realm were ultimately at the mercy of their unyielding stone fortresses and the biting grip of winter. The castle, a symbol of power and protection, became, in winter, a monument to the relentless challenge of merely staying alive, and vaguely, remotely, not frozen. This wasn't just a place to sleep, it was a battleground against the cold, and winning often meant simply not freezing to death. Having established that the castle itself was a monument to cold, let's venture deeper, beyond the great halls perpetually losing battle with the stone, and into the chambers where the nobility and their retinue actually attempted to catch some sleep. Forget the luxurious, comfortable bedrooms we envision today. In a medieval castle during winter, the bed was less a place of rest and more a strategic outpost in the nightly war against hypothermia, and the bedding, a pitiful arsenal in that same desperate conflict. The very location of sleeping chambers was often a compromise between safety and a faint hope of warmth. The most important people, the lord, the lady, their immediate family, would often sleep in chambers on upper floors primarily for security. Access was harder for intruders, and these rooms were less prone to the damp chill that seeped from the ground floor. However, higher up also meant more exposure to winds whistling through arrow slits and poorly fitted windows. For less important members of the household, knights, squires, favoured servants, sleeping arrangements could be more communal, often in curtained-off sections of a larger room, or even in the relative warmth of the great hall, huddling near the dying embers of the main fireplace. Now, let's talk about the bed itself. For the nobility, a bed was often a large wooden frame, sometimes carved, sometimes draped with heavy curtains. These four-poster beds were not merely decorative, they were crucial defensive structures against the cold. The heavy curtains, typically made of thick wool or even velvet for the truly wealthy, could be drawn completely around the bed, creating a microclimate. Imagine lying in a room where you could see your breath, but within the confines of your curtained bed, the air might feel a few degrees warmer, perhaps even faintly humid from your own exhalations. It was a small personal cave of slightly less cold air, a testament to ingenious, if rudimentary, thermal engineering. Underneath this canopy of fabric, the mattress was another layer of defense. For the wealthy, this might be a feather mattress, a rare luxury that offered some insulation and softness. More commonly, however, mattresses were stuffed with straw, wool, or even dried leaves. While these provided some cushioning, their primary function was insulation. Straw, though scratchy and prone to harbouring fleas and other delightful medieval pests, was excellent at trapping air and providing a barrier against the cold wooden bed frame. These mattresses would be thick, deep layers, piled one on top of another, creating a substantial barrier between your body and the cold. On top of the mattress came the bedding, and this was where the true battle was fought. Fine linen sheets, which would feel like ice when you first got in, followed by multiple wool blankets. These blankets weren't the soft, fluffy duvets of today. They were coarse, heavy, and often itchy, but their insulating power was unparalleled. Sometimes, Animal furs, sheepskin, rabbit, even fox for the richer lords, would be thrown over the wool blankets, adding another layer of dense, heat-trapping material. Imagine the sheer weight of these coverings, pinning you down, but offering the only real hope of retaining the heat your body was desperately trying to generate. And it wasn't just blankets. People would often sleep in their day clothes, or at least a significant portion of them. A heavy wool tunic, thick stockings, perhaps even a cloak. The idea of stripping down to flimsy night clothes and jumping into a cold bed would have been utterly alien and, frankly, suicidal in the depths of winter. You slept in your warmest possible attire, further augmenting the layers of the bed. Some might wear a nightcap to prevent heat loss from the head. A simple, practical piece of clothing that medieval people understood instinctively. Warming pans, long-handled metal pans filled with hot coals from the fireplace, would be run between the sheets to take the initial chill off the bed before you climbed in. This offered a brief, fleeting moment of warmth before the pervasive cold of the room began to reclaim its territory. Hot stones or bricks, heated by the fire and wrapped in cloth, might be placed at the foot of the bed, offering localized warmth. Sometimes, for the very young or the very infirm, a special small brazier with glowing coals might be brought into the room, though the danger of smoke inhalation and fire made this a risky proposition, rarely used for extended periods during sleep. Despite all these efforts, true warmth was a rare and fleeting luxury. The air in the room would still be frigid, often below freezing. Waking up to a layer of ice on the inside of the window shutters or even on the water in a pitcher in your room was not uncommon. Your breath would likely mist in the air, even within the confines of your curtained bed. Getting out of bed in the morning was an act of sheer will, a plunge from relative and hard warmth into the icy embrace of the castle. Communal sleeping was also a common strategy, particularly for servants or lower-ranking knights. Huddling together, sharing body heat, was an ancient and effective method of survival. Imagine a room with several men sharing a large straw mattress, or simply wrapped in cloaks on the floor near a dying fire. The collective warmth of multiple bodies was a powerful, if not entirely comfortable, antidote to the pervasive cold. Personal space and privacy were luxuries that simply didn't exist when survival was on the line. The soundscape of a medieval winter night was also distinct. The howl of the wind outside, finding its way through every crack and crevice, would be a constant, mournful companion. The creaking and groaning of the old timber framework, expanding and contracting with the cold, might sound like ghosts in the dark. And within the bed, despite all the layers, you'd likely hear the chattering of your own teeth, or the rustle of straw as you shifted, trying to find a position that momentarily evaded the cold. So, when you consider sleeping in a medieval castle during winter, abandon any notion of a cozy, silent retreat. Instead, picture a nightly battle for warmth, fought with layers of wool, thick curtains, straw mattresses, and the sheer desperation of human will. It was a cold, often damp, and frequently uncomfortable experience, where true warmth was an illusion, and getting through the night without succumbing to the chill was a victory in itself. The bed, far from being a soft embrace, was a vital defensive position, and every morning stepping out of it was a bracing, bone-chilling reminder of winter's unyielding reign within the stone heart of the fortress. We've huddled in the great hall, shivered in the stone chambers, and fought for warmth in layers of scratchy wool. Now, let's peel back the curtain of romantic illusion even further, and acknowledge that a medieval castle in winter wasn't just cold. Imagine not just the biting chill, but the all-pervasive damp, the complex tapestry of smells, and the constant symphony of discomfort that made merely existing, let alone sleeping, a Herculean effort. Stone, while formidable against siege engines, is also incredibly porous and a fantastic condenser. Combine thick stone walls with the constant breath of dozens, if not hundreds of people, livestock often housed in lower levels, minimal ventilation because of the cold, and perpetually cold outside temperatures, and you have a recipe for profound, inescapable dampness. moisture would condense on every cold stone surface, creating a clammy film that clung to everything. Tapestries, meant to provide insulation, would feel perpetually clammy. Clothing, even if clean, would never quite dry, retaining a heavy, musty odour. Beds, despite their layers, would gradually absorb the ambient moisture, becoming slightly chilled and heavy with condensation. Imagine trying to get a restful night's sleep when the very air feels like it's trying to permeate your bones with a persistent, penetrating wet cold. This wasn't just uncomfortable, it amplified the chill, making a 5-degree room feel like zero, and a 0-degree room feel like your very soul was freezing. Foremost among these was the ever-present scent of wood smoke. Despite chimneys, open fires filled rooms with a perpetual haze, clinging to fabrics, hair, and lungs. Add to this the smell of unwashed bodies. Hot water was a monumental undertaking to produce, requiring vast quantities of firewood, large cauldrons, and immense effort from servants. A full bath was a special event, not a daily ritual. So, weeks, if not months, could pass between proper washings. Imagine hundreds of people, layered in thick woolens, living in close quarters, generating a constant, pervasive human odour. Further contributing to the aromatic tapestry were animal smells. Stables were often close to the main castle buildings, or even incorporated into the lower levels for the very practical reason of their body heat. The presence of horses, dogs, and sometimes even pigs or chickens brought with it the inescapable odours of their waste and their own animal musk. Food smells, too, would linger. The scent of roasting meat and simmering stews, often mingled with the stale odours of past meals, creating a heavy, sometimes cloying atmosphere. And let's not forget the pervasive, if subtle, funk of old straw, damp wool, and the general medieval miasma of uncleaned nooks and crannies. Falling asleep in such an environment meant passing out from sheer exhaustion, often to a backdrop of these deep, layered emotional smells. Which brings us to sanitation, or the glorious lack thereof. The medieval toilet, the garderobe, was a prime example of form over function in winter. These were typically small, stone-lined closets built into the thickness of the castle walls, with a hole that dropped waste directly into the moat or a cesspit below. Imagine stepping into a narrow, unheated stone chute, open to the elements, with a constant icy draught whistling up from the depths, and the profoundly disgusting odours rising with it. A trip to the garderobe on a freezing winter night would be a terrifying, bone-chilling ordeal, a desperate dash into an open-air icebox of foulness. For more private chambers, chamber pots were the preferred method. These simple ceramic or metal vessels were kept under the bed and used throughout the night. Their contents, of course, had to be emptied. For nobles, this was a servant's duty, requiring a brave soul to carry the sloshing, foul-smelling pot through frigid corridors, perhaps to a garderobe or directly outside. For lower ranks, it meant braving the chill yourself, or simply leaving it until morning. The presence of these full chamber pots, even briefly, contributed to the overall smell and hygiene challenges of the castle, especially in winter when fresh air was a luxury avoided. And then the pests. The very elements used for warmth, straw mattresses, heavy wool blankets, were perfect breeding grounds. Fleas and lice were an undeniable constant presence. They burrowed into fabrics, hid in hair, and made a nightly feast of human blood. Imagine trying to sleep through the incessant itching, the feeling of tiny insects crawling across your skin. Bedbugs, those stealthy nocturnal bloodsuckers, also thrived in the dark, warm, relatively speaking, recesses of a bed. Beyond the microscopic invaders, rats and mice were constant, unwelcome guests. They sought warmth indoors, scurrying through walls, rustling in the straw of mattresses, gnawing at food stores, and occasionally venturing onto the bed itself. Their presence brought not just the risk of disease, though the link was unknown, but also a constant, unsettling noise and the general psychological discomfort of sharing your sleeping space with vermin. The incessant scratching of a flea, The rustle of a mouse in the corner, the distant snuffle of an animal in a lower level, the persistent creaking of ancient timbers expanding and contracting with the cold, all mingled with the mournful howl of the wind and the subtle, rhythmic drip of condensation. It was a symphony of discomfort, a constant reminder that you were deep within a cold, living, breathing, and slightly infested stone structure. The psychological impact of this constant sensory assault, combined with the cold, was profound. It led to a pervasive sense of lethargy, a constant battle against physical discomfort that drained mental energy. The cold made people more susceptible to illness. Though again germ theory was unknown, the effects were felt. The lack of true privacy, even for nobles who might have their own chamber, was another subtle stressor. Servants were always present, rooms were shared for warmth, and walls were not soundproof. This constant awareness of others, even in sleep, contributed to a certain emotional hardening, a necessity for simply enduring such conditions. Ultimately, sleeping in a medieval castle during winter was a raw, visceral experience. It was a constant negotiation with the elements, a daily test of endurance against dampness, stench, vermin, and the ceaseless, biting cold. For the medieval noble, even with their elevated status, luxury was a relative concept, and true comfort in winter was often an elusive, almost mythical state, sought in fleeting moments rather than guaranteed by design. Explored the frigid realities of medieval beds, and endured the sensory assault of dampness and smells. Now, let's consider the first line of defense against this relentless winter chill: the clothing. Forget fashion statements. In a medieval castle during winter, your wardrobe was a meticulously constructed survival suit, a testament to the fact that form utterly, desperately followed function. And even with all the layers, the pervasive dampness of stone walls and unheated rooms ensured that true dryness was almost as elusive as true warmth. There was no concept of a heated dressing room or a quick dash from a warm bed to a warm wardrobe. You would emerge from your curtained bed if you were noble, or from your communal straw pallet if you were of lower rank, directly into the biting cold of the unheated chamber. Every garment you put on would initially feel like a fresh layer of ice against your skin, slowly warming with your own body heat, only to begin chilling again as the damp air permeated the fabric. The fundamental principle of medieval winter attire was layering. And we're not talking 2 or 3 thin layers. We're talking many, often heavy, coarse layers designed to trap as much body heat as possible. For men, the process might begin with a linen shirt worn next to the skin. While linen was breathable, in winter it primarily served as a barrier against the coarser woolens and as a very relative measure of hygiene. Over this, a padded or quilted doublet would be worn. This was a close-fitting jacket, often laced or buttoned, that provided a significant layer of warmth and structure. For the nobility, doublets might be made of wool, fustian, a mix of linen and cotton, or even velvet for ceremonial occasions, though practicality often dictated sturdy wool in winter. Leg coverings were equally critical. Hose, tights, were typically made of thick wool and covered the legs, sometimes reaching the waist and attached to the doublet. These were vital for insulating the lower body, which, especially when sitting or standing on cold stone floors, was particularly vulnerable to the chill. Feet would be encased in several pairs of wool socks, thick and often hand-knitted, before being thrust into leather shoes or boots. These shoes, while robust, offered little insulation against persistent ground cold. Over the doublet, a variety of outer garments provided additional warmth. A tunic or gown, which, for men, was a longer, loose-fitting garment worn over other clothes, made of heavy wool, was common. The fur provided an unparalleled layer of insulation, trapping air and body heat with remarkable efficiency. Finally, a substantial cloak would be donned. A heavy, full-length wool garment, often lined and sometimes hooded, that could be wrapped tightly around the body, offering portable protection from drafts and external cold. This was often kept on indoors as well, serving as an extra blanket when sitting or even sleeping. For women, the layering was just as extensive, if slightly different in form. Over this came a kirtle, a fitted gown, usually made of wool or heavy linen, which served as the primary dress. In winter, kirtles would be made of the thickest possible wool. Over the kirtle, women would wear a looser outer gown, often also made of wool and, for noble women, perhaps lined with fur. Just like men, thick wool stockings and sturdy leather shoes or boots protected the feet and legs. A wimple or veil covering the head was standard for modesty. But in winter, a thick wool hood or a padded coif provided vital head warmth, preventing significant heat loss. Again, cloaks were indispensable, offering an additional layer of protection both indoors and out. The fabrics themselves were chosen for warmth and durability, not for softness or fine drape. Wool was king. Its fibers trap air efficiently, making it an excellent insulator even when damp. It was, however, often coarse, itchy and heavy. Linen, while cooler in summer, was used for undergarments because it was easier to wash, relatively speaking, and wore better next to the skin. The more luxurious fabrics like velvet or silk, while undeniably beautiful, were expensive and often reserved for outer layers or ceremonial wear, providing more warmth for aesthetic reasons than practical insulation. Crucially, drying clothes was a perennial winter challenge. Imagine hanging your damp, never truly dry, wool tunic near a smoky, inefficient fire. It would take hours, often days, and would emerge smelling strongly of smoke, but still carrying a subtle dampness. This meant that clothes were often worn for extended periods between washings, contributing to the overall odours of the castle and the proliferation of pests like fleas and lice, which thrived in warm, unwashed wool. The pervasive dampness of the stone walls meant that even stored clothing could absorb moisture, making everything feel clammy and cold. The choice of clothing was not merely a personal preference, it was dictated by the harsh realities of the environment and the constant biting cold. A lord's wealth wasn't just in the gold threads of his doublet, but in the thickness of its padding, the quality of the wool, and the luxuriousness of the fur lining his cloak, all of which were tangible investments in staying alive and moderately functional. For the servants and soldiers, their survival literally depended on the efficacy of their thick, often threadbare woolen layers. Beyond personal clothing, other textile items were pressed into service. Tapestries and wall hangings were not just decorative, they provided a vital, though often insufficient, layer of insulation, reducing the direct transfer of cold from the stone walls. While they didn't magically heat a room, they did cut down on drafts and provided a visually warmer environment. Rushes strewn on floors provided a thin, insulating layer against the cold stone, though they also collected dirt, food scraps, and fostered fleas. So, dressing for winter in a medieval castle was a deliberate, laborious process of layering, each garment a small shield against the cold, each fibre a trap for precious body heat. But even with all these efforts, the damp, penetrating cold of the stone fortress was a formidable opponent. The medieval winter wardrobe was a testament to resilience, resourcefulness, and a profound, intimate understanding of the elements, reminding us that warmth was not a given, but a hard-won victory achieved through layers of wool, thick furs, and an almost superhuman tolerance for discomfort. Having cloaked ourselves in layers of coarse wool and shivered within the perpetually damp stone, let's turn our attention to the internal battle against the cold. How the inhabitants of a medieval castle found sustenance, warmth, and even a semblance of cheer during the long, dark winter months. For in an era without central heating or instant hot beverages, the production and consumption of food and drink, along with the strategic deployment of fire, became not just matters of sustenance, but critical acts of survival and powerful symbols of communal life. Imagine the kitchens, typically bustling and smoky throughout the year, but in winter they transformed into veritable hotbeds of activity. These were often some of the warmest spaces in the castle by necessity. Massive fireplaces, large enough to roast an ox whole, would be kept constantly burning, not just for cooking, but as a source of radiant heat. Here, cooks and their scullery maids toiled over simmering stews roasting meats and baking bread, their faces flushed from the inferno, while the rest of their bodies might still feel the pervasive chill of the stone walls. The sheer scale of cooking required to feed a castle full of people, from the lord and lady to the humblest stable boy, meant constant, strenuous labour, generating heat that warmed both the food and the immediate environment. Food itself was chosen for its caloric density and its ability to store well. Fresh produce was scarce in winter, reserved only for the very start of the season, or for those wealthy enough to maintain hothouses, a rare luxury. The winter diet relied heavily on preserved foods, salted and smoked meats, pork, beef, venison, dried fish, root vegetables, carrots, parsnips, turnips, stored in cool, dark cellars, and vast quantities of grains, wheat, barley, oats for bread, pottage and ale. Hearty, thick stews and pottages, often simmering for hours over an open flame, were staples. These hot, calorie-rich meals provided essential internal warmth and energy, helping bodies fend off the cold. Imagine a steaming bowl of thick pottage, seasoned with a few precious spices, eaten by the flickering light of the great hall fire. It was more than just a meal. It was a life-sustaining ritual. Water, while available, was often cold and potentially unsafe, especially in winter when sources might freeze. Instead, ale and beer were the universal beverages, consumed by all ages and classes, from dawn till dusk. These were brewed from grains, were low in alcohol content compared to modern beers, often only 130%, and served as a safer, more calorie-rich alternative to water. A warm mug of ale could cut through the chill, providing a fleeting sense of internal heat. For the nobility, wine was also consumed, sometimes mulled with spices and warmed over the fire, offering a more luxurious and potent form of internal comfort. The constant consumption of these beverages, though perhaps leading to a perpetual state of mild inebriation by modern standards, was a practical strategy for hydration, calories, and combating the cold. Fire, of course, was the undisputed king of winter comfort. The great hall fireplace, a monumental construction, was the castle's central furnace. It would be kept burning day and night, requiring a constant stream of firewood and a dedicated team of servants to manage it. The radiant heat from this colossal blaze would be the primary source of warmth for the communal areas, drawing people like moths to a flame. Imagine dozens of people clustered around it, turning their backs to the fire to warm one side, then turning to warm the other, their faces flushed, their backs still chilled by the ambient room temperature. The crackle and roar of the fire were not just sounds, they were the very soundtrack of winter survival, a primal comfort in a relentlessly cold environment. Beyond the great hall, smaller fireplaces in the lord's private chambers, or the lady's solar, a private sitting room, offered more localized warmth, albeit less efficiently. Braziers. These offered a degree of localized heat, but came with significant risks. Smoke inhalation, carbon monoxide poisoning, though unknown, was a real threat, and the ever-present danger of accidental fire in a timber-framed, straw-matted room. These were used sparingly and with great caution, usually under direct supervision. The social dynamics around the fire were fascinating. The best spots, closest to the radiant heat, were reserved for the highest ranks. The lord and lady would sit in high-backed chairs, often on a raised dais, ensuring they received the lion's share of the warmth. Favoured guests and senior retainers might occupy the next circle. Further out, soldiers, squires and servants would jostle for a less frigid spot, often performing their duties by the light and heat of the fire. The fire was not just a source of physical warmth, it was a social magnet, a focal point for all activity, from conversation and storytelling to weapon cleaning and mending clothes. The psychological significance of fire cannot be overstated. In the pervasive gloom of medieval winter, with short days and long dark nights, the flickering, dancing light of the fire was a powerful symbol of life, hope and community. It pushed back the encroaching darkness, offered a mesmerizing focal point, and provided a sense of security against the unknown terrors that lurked beyond the castle walls in the depths of winter. The very act of gathering around it, sharing a meal or a story, fostered a sense of camaraderie and shared endurance, reminding everyone that they were in this battle against the cold together. Despite all these efforts, medieval castles in winter remained profoundly uncomfortable places. The heat generated by fires and bodies was always fighting a losing battle against the immense thermal mass of the stone. But the strategic use of high-calorie foods, internal warming drinks, and the sheer power of communal fire kept the spark of life going. It was a testament to human ingenuity and resilience, a daily ritual of sustenance and spirit, ensuring that even in the coldest, dampest heart of the stone fortress, the inhabitants could find enough warmth, both physical and psychological, to endure the long, brutal wait for spring. Now, let's explore another vital, yet often overlooked, aspect: how the inhabitants filled the endless, slow-moving hours, battling not just the cold, but the equally insidious enemy of boredom, and the unique forms of entertainment and communal activity that thrived in this confined, frigid environment. Because even in the heart of a stone icebox, the human spirit sought diversion and connection. Imagine the sheer duration of winter. Unlike our modern, fast-paced lives, medieval time moved at a different rhythm, dictated by the sun and the seasons. Winter, with its short, dim days and impossibly long nights, felt endless. With most outdoor activities curtailed by snow, ice, or bitter winds, the castle's population found themselves confined to its smoky, damp interiors for months on end. This forced proximity, coupled with repetitive routines, could be a breeding ground for not just discomfort, but also cabin fever, petty squabbles, and a pervasive sense of tedium. For the nobility and their immediate retinue, who weren't engaged in manual labor, indoor entertainment became crucial. Board games were incredibly popular. Chess, imported from the East, was a favorite, demanding strategic thinking and offering a challenging diversion. Games like checkers, drafts, backgammon, and various forms of dice games filled many an afternoon by the fire. Gambling was also widespread, with dice and card games. Cards became more common in the later Middle Ages, offering a chance for excitement, albeit sometimes leading to disputes. These games weren't just pastimes. They were social lubricants, opportunities for interaction, and a way to sharpen wits when physical activity was limited. Storytelling and poetry recitations were perhaps the most beloved forms of entertainment, especially in the Great Hall. Professional minstrels, troubadours, and jesters were invaluable assets, often travelling from castle to castle to entertain the lord and his household. In exchange for food, lodging, and coin, they would sing ballads of heroic knights, recount epic tales of love and betrayal, or tell humorous and often bawdy jokes that would elicit rare moments of joyous laughter. Even without professionals, members of the household would share stories, myths, and legends, passing down oral traditions and weaving communal narratives. Imagine the scene: a circle of faces by the firelight, listening intently as a captivating tale unfolds, momentarily forgetting the cold and damp outside. Music was another vital component of castle life. Noble ladies might play stringed instruments like harps or lutes, and singing was a common pastime. Minstrels often accompanied their stories with musical accompaniment, creating a rich auditory tapestry that broke the monotony of the long evenings. For dancing, a lively form of communal entertainment, was often performed in the Great Hall, raising spirits and generating some much-needed body heat. For the more literate, reading aloud was a cherished activity. Books, being rare and precious, were a luxury item, and literacy was not widespread. However, a lord or lady might have a small collection of manuscripts, religious texts, chivalric romances, histories, which would be read aloud to the assembled household. This was both entertainment and a form of education, exposing many to stories and ideas they might not otherwise encounter. The act of listening, gathered together, reinforced communal bonds. Beyond formal entertainment, practical activities filled much of the day for the broader castle population. Soldiers would spend hours maintaining their equipment, cleaning and polishing armor, sharpening swords, mending chainmail, and repairing bows. Servants would be constantly engaged in the endless chores of castle life, mending clothes, spinning wool, preparing food, and cleaning, or attempting to clean the sprawling, smoky interiors. These tasks, while mundane, were essential and often performed communally, fostering a sense of shared purpose and keeping hands busy and minds somewhat occupied. Religious observance naturally intensified during winter. With less external distraction and more time for introspection, prayer services might be more frequent or prolonged. Many castle inhabitants would attend daily mass in the castle chapel, seeking spiritual comfort and solace from the pervasive hardships. The stories of saints, the lessons from scripture, and the hope of divine mercy offered a powerful antidote to the fear and despair that could easily set in during the bleakest months. Boredom, however, was an ever-present threat, particularly for those of higher status who had fewer manual duties. The enforced idleness, the confinement within the same stone walls, and the repetitive nature of indoor activities could lead to lethargy and irritability. Petty squabbles and conflicts, often fueled by too much ale and too little fresh air, could easily erupt within the confined spaces of the castle. For the lord, managing the morale of his household was a critical, if unglamorous, winter task, requiring careful balance of activities, entertainment, and the occasional feast to break the monotony. Feasts, though perhaps less frequent than in warmer months due to supply constraints, were incredibly important morale boosters. A grand feast, with special foods, plentiful drink, and spirited entertainment, offered a temporary escape from the grinding discomfort of winter. It was a chance to celebrate, to reinforce social bonds, and to remember that life, even in the coldest fortress, held moments of joy and plenty. These celebrations were often timed around religious festivals, like Christmas or Twelfth Night, providing much-needed points of light in the long, dark winter. The long crawl of winter days, punctuated by these activities and distractions, ultimately forged a particular kind of resilience. When spring finally arrived, heralded by the first thaw and the lengthening of the days, it wasn't just a seasonal change. It was a profound spiritual awakening, a communal sigh of relief, and a tangible promise of renewed life, activity, and finally, an escape from the long, slow, cold weight of winter within the stone fortress. We've shivered through the castle's stone embrace, layered ourselves in wool, savoured the smoky warmth of the great hall, and passed the long hours with games and tales. Now, let's confront the darker, more insidious side of medieval castle winters, the constant grinding toll on health, the profound challenges of hygiene, and the subtle, yet devastating psychological impact of prolonged cold and confinement. Because in this harsh environment, simply surviving the winter often meant a relentless battle against unseen pathogens and the insidious creep of despair. Imagine the constant low-level physical distress. The pervasive dampness and cold didn't just make you uncomfortable, they made you vulnerable. Respiratory illnesses, coughs, colds, persistent chest infections, and the ever-present threat of pneumonia were rampant. The smoky air from inefficient fireplaces, combined with poor ventilation, because who would open a window in winter, irritated lungs and exacerbated existing conditions. Children and the elderly, with weaker immune systems, were particularly susceptible, and a bad winter cough could quickly escalate into a fatal illness. The lord and lady, with their marginally better conditions, might suffer from rheum catarrh and persistent sniffles, but for the common servants and soldiers, a chest infection could mean weeks of debilitating illness, potentially ending in death without any effective medical intervention. Then there was the issue of hygiene and its direct impact on health. As we touched upon earlier, bathing was a rarity. Hot water was a logistical nightmare to produce, so a full body wash might happen only a few times a year or less. Clothes, especially outer layers, were rarely washed and were often worn for weeks or months, accumulating grime, sweat, and odours. Lice were an almost universal companion, burrowing into hair and clothes, causing incessant itching and contributing to skin irritations and secondary infections from scratching. Fleas, carried by rats, dogs and humans, were also a constant nuisance, feasting on blood and, unknown to the medieval mind, acting as vectors for more serious diseases. The discomfort of these parasites was more than just irritating. It was a constant, low-grade torment that eroded quality of life and contributed to a general state of unwellness. Beyond parasites, skin conditions were common. Rashes, sores and infections thrived in unwashed bodies, damp clothes and close quarters. Without access to modern antiseptics or even basic understanding of wound care, a simple cut or abrasion could easily become infected, leading to debilitating pain, fever, and potentially limb loss or death. The cold itself could cause chilblains and frostnip, especially on exposed hands and feet, adding further misery. While castles stocked preserved foods, the winter diet could be monotonous and lack fresh vitamins, especially vitamin C. This made people susceptible to diseases like scurvy, though perhaps less severe in a single winter if summer stores were good. The heavy reliance on grains and salted meats, while providing calories, could lead to issues like constipation and general poor digestion, adding to the pervasive physical discomfort. A lack of clean, fresh water and a reliance on ale meant that dysentery and other waterborne illnesses could still be a threat, even in winter, exacerbated by rudimentary waste disposal. For the vast majority of the castle's inhabitants, the servants, soldiers, and lower retainers, health conditions were significantly worse than for the nobility. They often slept in more exposed, colder areas, had fewer changes of clothing, and less access to whatever rudimentary medical care, often just herbal remedies, from a local wise woman or the castle's chaplain, was available. Their bodies were constantly battling the cold, damp, and lack of true cleanliness, making them a more vulnerable population. Imagine a scullery maid, her hands chapped and raw from constant immersion in cold water, sleeping on a straw pallet by a perpetually smoky fireplace, always battling a cough. Her life was a constant exercise in physical endurance. Confinement and isolation from the outside world, enforced by snow-blocked roads and dangerous travel, could lead to a sense of claustrophobia and deep loneliness. The endless grey skies, the short dim days, and the long dark nights contributed to a subtle but pervasive seasonal depression. The lack of fresh air, sunshine, and varied scenery impacted mental well-being, fostering lethargy, irritability, and a general feeling of malaise. Boredom and monotony, as we noted, were powerful enemies. While games and storytelling provided diversion, the sameness of winter life, the repetitive indoor tasks, and the constant physical discomfort could easily wear down even the most cheerful spirit. Petty grievances, magnified by close quarters and stress, could fester and erupt into arguments or even violence. For the lord and lady, managing the moods and morale of their large household became an implicit, ongoing challenge. The constant low-level pain and discomfort, combined with the ever-present threat of illness, could lead to a pervasive fatalism. Winter in a castle merely reinforced this brutal reality, teaching its inhabitants to endure rather than to expect comfort or ease. Happiness became a fleeting moment, a warm meal, a captivating story, a brief respite from the grinding cold. Yet, amidst this harshness, there was also a profound sense of shared endurance. The collective struggle against the winter, the mutual reliance for warmth and sustenance, fostered a unique camaraderie. Surviving another winter together was a shared triumph, a testament to resilience. This communal aspect, however, came at the cost of individual privacy and comfort. The human spirit, in its endless adaptability, found ways to cope, to find small joys, and to forge bonds in the face of immense hardship. Ultimately, a medieval castle in winter was a powerful, if grim, lesson in survival. It tested the limits of human endurance, exposing the vulnerabilities of the body to cold, damp, and disease. It fostered a deep appreciation for the simplest comforts: a blazing fire, a warm meal, a dry layer of wool, and shaped a psychology of resilience born of necessity. The long, cold wait for spring was not just a passage of time, it was a crucible that constantly reminded everyone within its stone walls that life, even for the powerful, was a fragile, hard-won victory against the relentless forces of nature. We've explored the physical discomforts, the constant battle for warmth, the sensory onslaught, and the health challenges of winter in a medieval castle. Now, let's shift our focus to the often overlooked inhabitants whose experiences shaped and were shaped by these brutal months. The vast army of servants who made castle life possible, and the particular vulnerabilities of children and the elderly. Because while the lord and lady shivered in their somewhat less cold chambers, the true grinding reality of winter was borne by those at the bottom of the hierarchy, and endured with particular fragility by those at the very beginning and end of life. Consider first the servants and retainers. They were the unsung heroes, and often the most miserable sufferers of the medieval winter castle. For every noble lord or lady, there could be dozens, if not hundreds, of servants, cooks, scullery maids, laundresses, stable hands, pages, squires, guards, porters, carpenters, blacksmiths, and various other specialized household staff. Their lives were a relentless cycle of toil, made infinitely harder by the cold. Their sleeping arrangements were generally the most exposed and least comfortable. Many servants would sleep communally, often on straw pallets directly on the cold stone floors of the great hall, barracks, or designated servant quarters, spaces that rarely benefited from direct fireplace heat. Their bedding would be minimal: a thin straw mattress, a coarse wool blanket, and their own day clothes as extra layers. Their work was a constant battle against the elements. The cooks and scullery maids worked in perpetually smoky kitchens, but also faced the challenge of frozen provisions, ice-cold water for washing, and the sheer volume of fuel needed for cooking fires. The stable hands laboured in freezing, drafty stables, mucking out stalls where animal breath mingled with icy air. Laundresses worked with freezing water, their hands raw and chapped. Guards stood watch on battlements, exposed to howling winds and driving snow, their bodies encased in layers of wool and sometimes armour, but still fighting hypothermia. Every task, from fetching water to tending to the fires, required immense physical exertion, burning calories simply to stay warm. Their diet, while often sufficient in calories, was likely less varied and nutritious than the nobilities, making them more susceptible to illness. The vulnerability of children in this environment was particularly poignant. Childhood mortality rates were already tragically high in the medieval period, and winter in a castle amplified every risk. Young children, with their smaller body mass and less developed immune systems, were acutely vulnerable to the cold, damp, and prevalent respiratory illnesses. They would be bundled in layers of wool, often kept close to the great hall fire, or wrapped tightly in their beds. For noble children, wet nurses and attentive servants provided constant care, but even with this, the environment was unforgiving. For children of servants or poorer retainers, life was even harsher. They might share crowded, cold sleeping areas, have fewer clothes, and receive less direct care, increasing their risk of sickness and death. Play, a vital part of childhood, would be largely confined to indoors, often within the smoky great hall or other communal areas, limiting their access to fresh air and sunlight. The memories of a medieval noble child growing up in a winter castle would be filled with the constant chill, the heavy woolen layers, the smoky air, the fascination with the roaring fire, and perhaps the dull ache of cold toes and fingers. Already frail, often suffering from chronic aches and pains exacerbated by the cold and damp, conditions that would be dismissed as rheumatism or old age, they struggled to maintain body heat. Their mobility would be limited, making it difficult to move from the relative warmth of the fire to their sleeping quarters. They relied heavily on the care of their families or servants to ensure they were adequately clothed, fed, and kept as warm as possible. A fall on an icy stone floor, a severe chest cold, or the onset of an incapacitating fever could quickly prove fatal. Winter was a time when the elderly often retreated to their beds, hoping to sleep through the coldest months, relying on their body's last reserves of strength to endure. Beyond the physical, the psychological impact on everyone was profound. The long, drawn-out confinement could exacerbate existing tensions and create new ones. Petty squabbles could escalate. The absence of stimulating outdoor activity and the sameness of indoor life led to a feeling of stagnation. For the Lord, managing a large household through these trying months was a significant leadership challenge. Maintaining morale, preventing disputes, ensuring adequate provisions, and keeping everyone productive, or at least occupied, was a test of his administrative skills and personal charisma. A lord who failed in these duties might face a restless, unhappy, and potentially rebellious household. The very landscape of thought shifted. The long winter nights, devoid of external light pollution, would offer unparalleled views of the stars. For a medieval mind, this could deepen a sense of both cosmic wonder and human insignificance, fostering contemplation on faith, destiny, and the natural order. Religious stories, already central to life, took on new resonance during these dark, cold months, offering hope and solace against the perceived harshness of the divine. Finally, there was the anticipation of spring. This was not merely a seasonal change, it was a profound psychological and communal yearning. The first lengthening of the days, the first subtle hint of thaw, the first bird song that wasn't muffled by snow, would be met with profound relief. Spring was a promise of liberation from the cold, from the damp, from the confinement, from the constant threat of sickness. It meant a return to outdoor activity, fresh food, cleaner air, and the invigorating sense of renewed life. The entire castle would stir with a fresh energy, a collective shedding of the winter's heavy cloak of gloom. The medieval winter in a castle was a brutal, pervasive experience, defined by the relentless cold, the challenge of basic survival, and the profound resilience required from every inhabitant, regardless of rank or age. It was a time that highlighted the stark realities of medieval life, stripping away romantic notions to reveal the sheer effort it took to simply exist, waiting patiently for the return of the sun and the merciful warmth of spring. We have, together, embarked on a chilling journey into the very heart of a medieval castle in winter, meticulously peeling back the layers of romantic fantasy to expose the raw, unyielding reality beneath. We've endured the architectural defiance of comfort, shivered through the ingenious but inadequate bedding, battled the relentless sensory assault of cold and damp, and navigated the ever-present threats to health and morale. We have acknowledged the immense, often invisible, labour of the servants, the profound vulnerability of children and the elderly, and the deep psychological toll exacted by months of confinement and pervasive discomfort. We will contemplate the profound, far-reaching echoes of this singular experience, how such unrelenting hardship not only tested the very limits of human endurance, but fundamentally redefined medieval values, reshaped societal priorities, and ultimately offers us an invaluable, albeit stark, lens through which to appreciate our own often unseen modern comforts, forging a deeper understanding of human progress itself. What we, in our 21st century context, consider basic human rights. A reliable source of warmth, a reasonable standard of cleanliness and hygiene, consistently adequate nutrition, the solace of personal privacy, and even a rudimentary level of safety from preventable illness. They were, for many months of the year, aspirations often beyond the wildest, most fervent dreams of even the most powerful lords and ladies who commanded these stone fortresses. Their entire existence during winter was a perpetual negotiation with fundamental discomfort, a daily, grinding, and often painful battle against elemental forces that sought to penetrate every crack in the stone, every layer of wool, and ultimately every fibre of their very being. This wasn't merely surviving in the passive sense, it was a profound, active and sustained act of resilience, a testament to the sheer tenacity of life itself. This relentless season-long struggle against the environment profoundly and irrevocably redefined medieval values. Instead, people learned to find solace, contentment, and even moments of profound pleasure in what we would now consider rudimentary necessities or fleeting respites. The sheer, raw, radiant heat emanating from a colossal smoky fire, however inefficiently it warmed the vast hall. The deeply satisfying sensation of a full belly after a hearty, calorie-rich meal of preserved meats, thick pottage, and dense bread. The relatively safe and warm embrace of a heavily layered bed, even if it meant sharing precious body heat with others and battling the unseen legions of fleas, lice and mice. The simple, yet powerful, act of gathering around a communal hearth, sharing stories of past exploits or future hopes, and partaking in warm ale, transcended mere entertainment. It became a vital social ritual, a communal act of defiance against the isolating cold and the encroaching darkness, fostering deep and unbreakable bonds forged in shared hardship and a desperate need for human connection. Furthermore, the experience of winter in a castle starkly underscored the absolute importance of community and profound interdependence. No individual, not even the powerful lord who owned the castle, could hope to survive the winter alone, or even with a minimal staff. The meticulous, labour-intensive preparation of vast firewood stores, enough to last for months, required the coordinated efforts of dozens, if not hundreds, of woodcutters, haulers, and stackers. The continuous cooking and meal preparation for an entire household, sometimes numbering in the hundreds, demanded a dedicated and tireless kitchen staff. This intense, practical reliance on one another, from the highest noble who provided resources to the lowest servant who performed the most arduous tasks, reinforced the intricate, often invisible web of medieval society, highlighting how every individual's contribution, however seemingly small or humble, was absolutely essential for the collective survival through the bleakest, most challenging season. The ability to accurately estimate and diligently store enough provisions, whether salted and smoked meats, dried fish, root vegetables preserved in earth, or vast quantities of grain, and, critically, enough fuel for the perpetually burning fires, was not merely a matter of good planning or administrative skill. It was, quite literally, the stark difference between life and death for the entire castle population. This existential necessity fostered an incredibly deep, practical understanding of seasonal cycles, sophisticated preservation techniques for their time, and an almost reverent appreciation for the precious value of every single resource. Waste, for much of the population, was not merely inefficient, it was an unthinkable, dangerous luxury that could lead to widespread famine or freezing. Efficiency, careful stewardship of dwindling resources, and a disciplined approach to consumption were paramount virtues, born not of abstract philosophy, but of the immediate, tangible demands of survival. For the medieval mind, grappling with such profound and pervasive physical discomfort, coupled with the seasonal contraction of the world, naturally led to a greater, more intense reliance on spiritual solace and introspective thought. The long dark nights, the brutal, unrelenting cold, and the constant chilling threat of illness fostered a powerful sense of introspection and often deepened fervent faith. The castle chapel, frequently one of the slightly warmer and more enclosed spaces within the fortress, became a true haven, not just for communal prayer services, but for quiet, personal contemplation. Religious stories, particularly those emphasizing themes of human endurance, divine hope, and the ultimate promise of an eternal afterlife, took on a potent, comforting resonance, offering a psychological balm against the relentless physical hardships. Winter was a time for heightened devotion, for communal prayer, and for reinforcing the spiritual narratives that gave ultimate meaning to an otherwise harsh and often incomprehensible existence. The psychological toll of winter, while often subtle and insidious, also played a crucial role in sculpting the medieval psyche. The long periods of enforced confinement, the unavoidable monotony of indoor life, and the pervasive, inescapable physical discomfort could easily lead to irritability, interpersonal conflicts, and a form of chronic, low-grade seasonal depression. Yet, paradoxically, it also cultivated a remarkable and often stoic patience and unparalleled resilience. Medieval people were inherently accustomed to enduring hardship as a fundamental condition of life. The long, drawn-out wait for spring was more than just a seasonal transition. It was a profound, annual test of this innate patience, an arduous lesson in the acceptance of discomfort, and a deeply felt celebration of delayed gratification when the first tangible signs of warmth and renewed life finally, mercifully, emerged from the frozen landscape. We, in our technologically advanced age, take for granted an astonishing array of comforts. Instant, ubiquitous warmth at the flick of a switch or the turn of a dial, unparalleled access to fresh food and varied produce available year-round, regardless of season or geography, an endless supply of hot running water for daily cleansing, clean, comfortable, and endlessly changeable clothing, soft, warm, pest-free beds in private, well-insulated rooms, and a vast arsenal of medications that can banish everything from the common cold to debilitating infections. The privacy and personal space of our individual, perfectly heated and ventilated homes, the profound silence of a truly pest-free environment, the constant availability of stimulating entertainment, and the unparalleled ease of travel are not just conveniences. They are profound, almost miraculous, luxuries that transcend anything a medieval king or queen could have possibly imagined, let alone experienced. Our scientific understanding of hygiene, disease, and health has utterly transformed our winters from a season of existential threat and pervasive suffering into one that is often associated with festive comfort, cozy gatherings, and joyous celebration. So, when we now gaze upon the formidable, enduring stone walls of a medieval castle, let its imposing grandeur not merely evoke romanticized images of chivalry, power, and courtly love. Let that mental picture also include the visceral reality of its cold, damp embrace in winter. The smoky eyes, the chattering teeth, the layered, scratchy wool, the pervasive, inescapable dampness that seeped into every single corner of the fortress. Let it be a powerful, unromanticized testament to the lives lived within those walls, a profound and necessary reminder of human resilience in the face of relentless environmental challenge. Let it be a silent tribute to the countless individuals, from the loftiest noble to the lowliest scullery maid, who simply endured. They didn't just survive the winter, they conquered it, day by cold, damp, smoky, and challenging day, forever shaping their values, their communities, and leaving behind a rich, albeit often harsh, legacy that makes our own comfortable winters feel like an extraordinary, one miracle of human progress and technological advancement. And that, in the grand, chilling, and utterly compelling tapestry of human history, a tapestry woven with threads of both immense suffering and astonishing perseverance, is absolutely everything. We have journeyed through the freezing stone, felt the damp, and battled the cold. Yet, even within the confines of the castle, there were other lives, often unseen or unacknowledged, whose presence profoundly shaped the winter experience. Furthermore, we must dive deeper into the pervasive, profound darkness of medieval winter nights, and the unique soundscape that filled those long, frigid hours. Because a castle in winter was not just cold, it was a teeming, dimly lit, and audibly distinct ecosystem where man and beast coexisted in a grim, symbiotic dance against the elements. Let's first consider the unseen companions, the castle animals. While we touched on pests, the presence of larger, domesticated animals was a daily and often nightly reality. Dogs were ubiquitous. Hunting hounds, guard dogs, and smaller lap dogs for the nobility all sought the meagre warmth of human habitations. They would often sleep curled by the dying embers of the great hall fire, or at the foot of their master's bed, providing a small, living, furry hot water bottle. Their body heat, however modest, was a welcome addition to the general warmth strategy, and their presence offered companionship against the pervasive loneliness of winter confinement. However, they also brought their own challenges: fleas, adding to the human population, the smells of damp fur, and the occasional noise. Beyond dogs, other animals were strategically integrated into the castle's thermal plan. Stables were often located close to, or even within the lower levels of, the castle keep for defensibility and, crucially, for their radiated warmth. The collective body heat of dozens of horses, with their massive bodies and constant metabolic activity, generated a significant amount of warmth, often making the stable area one of the warmest places in the entire fortress. Imagine the stable lads, or even guards, huddling in these areas, perhaps catching a few hours of sleep in the hay, enduring the powerful pungent smells of manure and horse, but finding a welcome respite from the outside chill. This practice highlighted the desperate pragmatism of medieval life. Utility often trumped hygiene or comfort. Even smaller livestock, like a few pigs or chickens, might be brought indoors to sheltered outbuildings, or even lower, less used chambers during the harshest weather. Their presence was less about direct warmth for humans, and more about protecting valuable food sources, but their body heat would contribute to the microclimate of their immediate surroundings. This constant proximity to animals, both wild and domesticated, meant a very different sensory experience than we know today, profoundly impacting the smells, sounds, and hygiene of the winter castle. Our modern lives are saturated with light, making it almost impossible to truly comprehend the absolute gloom that descended upon a castle after sunset. There was no electricity, no gaslight, no street lights beyond the occasional flickering torch on a battlement. Light sources indoors were minimal and precious. Fires in the hearth offered the primary but localized illumination. Candles, made of tallow, animal fat, for the common folk, or beeswax for the wealthy, beeswax burned cleaner and brighter, were expensive and reserved for specific tasks or the most important chambers. A few rushlights, dried rushes dipped in animal fat, provided a dim, smoky flicker, barely enough to see by. Imagine the experience. By late afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the castle began to surrender to the encroaching shadows. By dusk, the great hall would be a cavern of gloom, illuminated only by the fire and perhaps a few strategically placed candles. Moving through the castle's corridors and stairwells after dark was a treacherous affair, requiring a servant with a torch, or a deep familiarity with every uneven step and unseen obstacle. The outer chambers, far from the central fires, would be utterly black, save for any moonlight filtering through crude window coverings. This pervasive darkness fundamentally altered perception. Sounds would be amplified, shadows would dance and twist into unsettling shapes, and the human imagination, left to its own devices, would conjure myriad fears, from bandits seeking entry to the supernatural entities that medieval people genuinely believed lurked in the dark. This lack of light also affected winter routines. Work that required fine detail, like reading, writing, or intricate craft work, had to be done during daylight hours, or by the precious flickering light of a candle, straining eyes and limiting productivity. Even social gatherings would largely be restricted to the immediate vicinity of the fire, where conversations would take place in intimate, dimly lit huddles. The long nights were truly long, pushing people towards early bedtimes and a greater reliance on sleep, or simply on quiet contemplation and storytelling in the dark. This leads us to the unique soundscape of a medieval winter night. Beyond the human sounds of snoring, coughing, and occasional mumbled prayers, the night was alive with other noises. The constant, mournful howl of the wind outside the thick stone walls, finding its way through every arrow slit, every ill-fitting window, every crack in the ancient mortar, was a perpetual companion. It whistled, it moaned, it rattled loose shutters, and it created a symphony of unsettling creaks and groans as the ancient timbers of the castle expanded and contracted with the brutal cold. Within the castle, the sounds of the unseen companions were ever present. the rustle of mice and rats scurrying within the walls or through the straw of beds, their tiny claws scratching against stone and wood, the distant guttural snuffle of livestock in a lower chamber, the occasional whine or snore of a dog by the fire, and the rhythmic, almost hypnotic drip of condensation forming and falling from cold stone arches. These natural sounds, often ignored in daylight, took on a heightened significance in the deep darkness, contributing to an atmosphere of uneasy vigilance. Sleep, even when possible, was rarely silent or unbroken. The constant itching of fleas and lice, the rustle of rodents, the groaning of the castle itself, and the omnipresent cold would conspire to interrupt rest. Dreams, for those who experienced them, would likely be vivid, perhaps reflecting the anxieties and hardships of their waking lives. The soundscape of a medieval winter night was thus a complex tapestry of natural elements, animal presence, and the subtle, unsettling creaks of an ancient cold fortress, all amplified by the profound, enveloping darkness. It was a constant reminder that even in sleep, the battle for comfort, and indeed survival, was never truly over. The human capacity for adaptation is astonishing, but these conditions, the constant proximity to animals, the deep, isolating darkness, and the unrelenting cacophony of discomfort, etched themselves into the very fabric of medieval life. They influenced daily rituals, shaped fears, and underscored the profound divide between a world perpetually struggling with its environment and our own, illuminated, climate-controlled existence. We've endured the architectural defiance of comfort, shivered through the ingenious but often inadequate bedding, inhaled the complex and frequently foul tapestry of castle smells, felt the insidious creep of illness and boredom, and listened to the eerie soundscape of profound darkness and unseen animal companions. We have acknowledged the immense, often invisible, labour of the servants, the profound vulnerability of children and the elderly, and the deep psychological toll exacted by months of confinement and pervasive discomfort. We will contemplate the profound, far-reaching and multifaceted echoes of this singular historical experience. How such unrelenting hardship not only tested the very limits of human endurance, but fundamentally redefined medieval values, reshaped societal priorities, and ultimately offers us an invaluable, albeit stark, lens through which to understand human progress and appreciate our own often unseen modern comforts, forging a deeper and more nuanced understanding of our past and present. What we, in our 21st century context, consider basic human rights, a reliable and consistent source of warmth, a reasonable standard of cleanliness and hygiene, consistently adequate and varied nutrition, the solace of personal privacy, and even a fundamental level of safety from preventable illness, were not merely luxuries. They were, for many months of the year, distant aspirations often beyond the wildest, most fervent dreams of even the most powerful lords and ladies who commanded these imposing stone fortresses. Their entire existence during winter was a perpetual, exhausting negotiation with fundamental discomfort, a daily, grinding, and often painful battle against elemental forces that sought to penetrate every crack in the stone, every layer of wool, and ultimately every fibre of their very being. This wasn't merely surviving in a passive sense, it was a profound, active, and sustained act of resilience, a testament to the sheer, stubborn tenacity of life itself. Instead, people learned to find solace, contentment, and even moments of profound pleasure in what we would now consider rudimentary necessities or fleeting respites. The sheer, raw, radiant heat emanating from a colossal smoky fire, however inefficiently it warmed the vast hall. The deeply satisfying sensation of a full belly after a hearty, calorie-rich meal of preserved meats, thick pottage, and dense bread. The relatively safe and warm embrace of a heavily layered bed, even if it meant sharing precious body heat with others and battling the unseen legions of fleas, lice, and mice. The simple, yet powerful, act of gathering around a communal hearth, sharing stories of past exploits or future hopes, and partaking in warm ale, transcended mere entertainment. It became a vital social ritual, a communal act of defiance against the isolating cold and the encroaching darkness, fostering deep and unbreakable bonds forged in shared hardship and a desperate need for human connection. The absence of modern distractions also amplified these simple pleasures, making a well-told tale or a warm drink feel profoundly impactful. Furthermore, the experience of winter in a castle starkly underscored the absolute importance of community and profound interdependence. No individual, not even the powerful lord who owned the castle, could hope to survive the winter alone, or even with a minimal staff. The meticulous, labour-intensive preparation of vast firewood stores, enough to last for months, required the coordinated efforts of dozens, if not hundreds, of woodcutters, haulers, and stackers. The continuous cooking and meal preparation for an entire household, sometimes numbering in the hundreds, demanded a dedicated and tireless kitchen staff. This intense, practical reliance on one another, from the highest noble who provided the organisational framework and resources, to the lowest servant who performed the most arduous, physically draining tasks, reinforced the intricate, often invisible web of medieval society, highlighting how every individual's contribution, however seemingly small or humble, was absolutely essential for the collective survival through the bleakest, most challenging season. The ability to accurately estimate and diligently store enough provisions, whether salted and smoked meats, dried fish, root vegetables preserved in earth, or vast quantities of grain, and, critically, enough fuel for the perpetually burning fires, was not merely a matter of good planning or administrative skill. It was, quite literally, the stark difference between life and death for the entire castle population. This existential necessity fostered an incredibly deep, practical understanding of seasonal cycles, sophisticated preservation techniques for their time, and an almost reverent appreciation for the precious value of every single resource. Waste, for much of the population, was not merely inefficient, it was an unthinkable, dangerous luxury that could lead to widespread famine or freezing. Efficiency, careful stewardship of dwindling resources, and a disciplined approach to consumption were paramount virtues, born not of abstract philosophy but of the immediate, tangible demands of survival. For the medieval mind, grappling with such profound and pervasive physical discomfort, coupled with the seasonal contraction of the world and the deep darkness, naturally led to a greater, more intense reliance on spiritual solace and introspective thought. The long dark nights, the brutal, unrelenting cold, and the constant chilling threat of illness fostered a powerful sense of introspection and often deepened fervent faith. The castle chapel, frequently one of the slightly warmer and more enclosed spaces within the fortress, became a true haven, not just for communal prayer services, but for quiet, personal contemplation. Religious stories, particularly those emphasizing themes of human endurance, divine hope, and the ultimate promise of an eternal afterlife, took on a potent, comforting resonance, offering a psychological balm against the relentless physical hardships. Winter was a time for heightened devotion, for communal prayer, and for reinforcing the spiritual narratives that gave ultimate meaning to an otherwise harsh and often incomprehensible existence. The pervasive darkness also encouraged a form of internal reflection, forcing the mind to seek its own light. The psychological toll of winter, while often subtle and insidious, also played a crucial role in sculpting the medieval psyche. The long periods of enforced confinement, the unavoidable monotony of indoor life, and the pervasive, inescapable physical discomfort could easily lead to irritability, interpersonal conflicts, and a form of chronic, low-grade seasonal depression. Yet, paradoxically, it also cultivated a remarkable and often stoic patience and unparalleled resilience. Medieval people were inherently accustomed to enduring hardship as a fundamental condition of life. The long, drawn-out wait for spring was more than just a seasonal transition. It was a profound, annual test of this innate patience, an arduous lesson in the acceptance of discomfort, and a deeply felt celebration of delayed gratification when the first tangible signs of warmth and renewed life finally, mercifully, emerged from the frozen landscape. We, in our technologically advanced age, take for granted an astonishing array of comforts that would have been utterly miraculous to our medieval ancestors. Instant, ubiquitous warmth at the flick of a switch or the turn of a dial, controlled by thermostats. Unparalleled access to fresh food and varied produce available year-round, regardless of season or geography, transported globally, an endless supply of hot running water for daily cleansing and sanitation. Clean, comfortable, and endlessly changeable clothing, often made from soft, artificial fibers. Soft, warm, pest-free beds in private, well-insulated and completely dark rooms, and a vast arsenal of medications that can banish everything from the common cold to debilitating infections. The privacy and personal space of our individual, perfectly heated and ventilated homes, the profound silence of a truly pest-free environment, the constant availability of stimulating entertainment through screens and media, and the unparalleled ease of travel are not just conveniences. They are profound, almost miraculous, luxuries that transcend anything a medieval king or queen could have possibly imagined, let alone directly experienced. Our scientific understanding of hygiene, disease, and health has utterly transformed our winters from a season of existential threat and pervasive suffering into one that is often associated with festive comfort, cozy gatherings, and joyous celebration. So, when we now gaze upon the formidable, enduring stone walls of a medieval castle, let its imposing grandeur not merely evoke romanticized images of chivalry, power, and courtly love. Let that mental picture also include the visceral reality of its cold, damp embrace in winter. The smoky eyes, the chattering teeth, the layered, scratchy wool, the pervasive, inescapable dampness that seeped into every single corner of the fortress. Let it be a powerful, unromanticized testament to the lives lived within those walls, a profound and necessary reminder of human resilience in the face of relentless environmental challenge. Let it be a silent tribute to the countless individuals, from the loftiest noble to the lowliest scullery maid, who simply endured and, in their endurance, laid the groundwork for the comforts we now so readily enjoy. They didn't just survive the winter, they conquered it, day by cold, damp, smoky, and challenging day, forever shaping their values, their communities, and leaving behind a rich, albeit often harsh, legacy that makes our own comfortable winters feel like an extraordinary, hard, one miracle of human progress and technological advancement. And that, in the grand, chilling, and utterly compelling tapestry of human history. A tapestry woven with threads of both immense suffering and astonishing perseverance, is absolutely everything.